Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody. Yes, my name's John Scully. I'm here in this wonderful city of Melbourne. I'm from Melbourne, and had a great day yesterday. Now, to make sure that you get up so early in the morning, we hope this morning's session works for you. We're talking about how to write a news release. In front of you, you've got my talk. I've decided to give it to you now because we have lots of detail in this, and you may not want to have time to write it all down. So you can follow me through if you wish, or you can just sit and listen, or nod off to sleep, or have a cup of coffee. It's entirely up to you. You also find a second sheet of paper there, which is my analysis of news release possibilities for previous awards your industry's given. And one of those will be a little writing test I'll give you at the end of my presentation. There'll be an answer sheet handed out as well. So if you feel like you're struggling, don't matter, because we'll give you the answer. So you've got my speech in front of you, plus a single sheet of 4 examples of how I might analyse an award for a news release, and you'll get a third sheet later on, which looks like this. Okay. So sit back, relax, and we'll talk about how to do a news release. Why write a news release in the first place? It's to tell your customers, your competitors, and anyone else who reads what you are doing. Sounds simple really, but it isn't. But it's like riding a bike. Once you get the essentials mastered, you can almost do it in your sleep. Believe me, I've been doing it for 22 years, and the basic trade I'm telling you now, I learnt in the first 18 months 20 years ago, and it hasn't changed. To get your news release published, you have to convince the journalist that what you've got is of some news value. How? Well, unfortunately, there are no simple and clear definitions of what makes news. There'd be a view of that across everyone in this room. But to begin with, you have to be objective and analyse your item. Ask yourself, would somebody else be interested in what I'm about to say? To be news, your statement, your news release, has to be significant, important not only to you but to others, interesting to journalists, readers, listeners and viewers. Will it affect people? Is it current? Is it unusual? Now, you don't have to meet all those tests, but you have to be very objective and no nonsense with yourself when you say, OK, I'm going to write a news release. Because I can tell you all the journalists I've ever worked for, they'll tell you 80% of the news releases that come across their desk, they reject. How do you write a news release? Writing a news release is a strictly designed form of writing, strictly disciplined form of writing, very strict. You've got to follow the rules or you don't pass. But once you know the rules, you're okay. It has to conform to space restrictions. Newspapers, magazines, broadcast and radio, television don't have much space or time. Many are produced under tight time deadlines. Most of them are, in fact. And has to follow a certain format. Writing news releases involves presenting information in such a way that it can be eliminated because of space restrictions, leaving a story that will stand up and communicate the most important facts. Oh yes, yeah. It is referred to in the media as writing from the top. Unlike writing an essay or a short story, which uses a slow and sometimes intricate opening for reasons of suspense, to set a scene, to add colour, the journalist will lead with the most important information first. Why? It's necessary because most readers, viewers and listeners, and you're all one of those, seldom read or hear a story in full. It's why they keep having headlines repeated throughout a half-hour news television bulletin. Most people scan headlines and only listen to the first few lines of a news broadcast. You must write a news release that is as close as possible to the way it will appear in the newspaper or magazine. By knowing and using the techniques of writing a news release, you're making it easier for the journalist to decide whether to use it or not. How does it begin? It begins with what we call the intro. In the jargon, intro or introduction. The intro is critical to your news release being read and eventually being published. Absolutely critical. It will determine whether the journalist and then the reader will be hooked, as we say in the business. Are they hooked? In fact, they'll say, what is the hook? And will read on. What grabs their attention? What's in it for the reader? The essential element of the intro is that it goes straight to the main point, even the conclusion, immediately. And the intro is no more than 25 words. And later this morning, I'm going to be asking you to write an intro for this news release. In the news release writing test, I'll ask you to do the same thing later on. Prepare the first paragraph or possibly the third and fourth. How do you write a news release? Well, a number of rules. Let's take them one at a time. It must answer 6 questions. What happened, where it happened, why it happened, how it happened, and who was involved. If you've ever been to news release writing school, public relations school, journalism schools, they're referred to as the 4 Ws or the 5 Ws. Unless your intro or news release answers those questions, it's not going to work for you. Keep it simple. Don't use technical or flowery language. You might know what it means, but no one else will. Most of the popular high circulation newspapers and magazines can be read as easily by someone 13 years of age. Talking about the Herald Sun in Melbourne, the Sun Herald in Sydney, even the Financial Review, some of the more technical pages there, is very simple. Use short sentences. 25 words for the intro, for example. 1 idea per sentence. 1 sentence equals 1 paragraph in news release writing terms. But if you must write longer paragraphs, no more than 2 or 3 short sentences. Attribution. When writing a news release, it's important to attribute statements or put a name in quotes that are written in the news release. This is done for 2 reasons: to distinguish between opinion of the company from fact. Now, you might think your latest little gizmo is the world's greatest thing since sliced bread, but the journalist is not. He'll want to know why it works, how it works, colour, price, all those things. You've got to give it. That's fact. You can then say it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but keep these things separate. And it also, by attributing things, it gives a voice. It puts your name into the news release. So Joe Bloggs of Blogs Promotion said, that's absolutely important because the journalists will want to know who's saying this. Whether they believe it or not comes later. Who is saying this? So it gives the news release a voice, as we say. 4th point, editorialising. This is related to attribution, and it's the point I made before. Keep fact and opinion clearly separated when you write your news release. Given the hard-nosed details, price, colour, accessibility, and then you can waffle on in your own language about how you think it is wonderful. But don't mix the two. It'll confuse a journalist and you're unlikely to get your story run. So separate fact and opinion. Editorialising is putting your own opinion forward about an issue or product. So an editorial in a newspaper is an opinion, it's not news. So when you read the editorial of The Australian, the Financial Review, Sun Herald, it's opinion of the editor of the day. Not fact, it's opinion. They like to think it's fact, but it's opinion. Editorialising happens when opinion is included, sometimes deliberate with the facts. An alert sub-editor, now a sub-editor is a person who will get your piece of paper and they'll read it. And in 2 seconds flat, they'll pick the bullshit from the fact. Now, you're entitled to put bullshit in if you like, but your job is to get fact in as well. An alert sub-editor will quickly spot the difference and cut it out. You can include your opinion in your news release if you like, but don't expect it to be reported. Stick to the facts. Of course, if the journalist rings you up and asks you for an opinion, that's fine. But stick to the facts. Now, once you've got some words in your brain, and this is as almost important as content is in fact the way it's presented on the page. And there's a particular format that journalists want to see if they're going to be interested in reading your news release. And the answer sheet I'll give you later on follows this format. Layout is almost as important, some say as important, as your words. Here are 9 features of a correctly presented news release. Now you say 9, there's too many, John. Well, it's not really, because once you'll see them, you'll see they make sense. Letterhead of your company. Make sure your own company's name is clear and visible at the top of the page. That's where you can promote yourself. The words news release, as large or nearly as large as your own company name, should be up there next to it as well. Now you can take your own piece of corporate stationery and type in news release if you need, or if you really want to get excited, you can go and get them printed. Doesn't matter. A short heading to tell what the story is about, naturally. Include a date. And in more contemporary news release writing in Australia, it's going to the top of the page. In the olden days, it was down the bottom, but it's going up near the top. Try to keep it to one page. The answer sheet's in one page. Now, you'll know that the product you're going to talk about will want 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 pages. Don't do it. Essentially, the news release is an appetizer. It's an introduction to a longer story, perhaps. So don't try and put absolutely everything you've ever known about this particular event or a product in one news release. One page, that's all you need. It opens the door. If you have to go to a second page, make sure there's clear signs on the bottom of it to turn over. Use wide margins down the side and some nice clear space between the lines and the paragraphs. That's so the journalist can get his pen out, like this, and go cross, cross, cross. Or ask this, or cross that out. 1.5 to 2 lines spacing is sufficient. Include contact details. Once upon a time, this used to be down the bottom of the news release, but more lately, it's up the top with the date. And that's crucial. Your name, your business name, your mobile name, every possible way they can get to you should be on the top of that news release. After-hours phone numbers particularly, because journalists work when we're not. And finish with ends, or finish, or stop, so that the journalist knows when you've got to that line, there's no more. And that applies, all these rules, by the way, apply for both electronic and hard copy. Now you've got some words, now you know how to put it on the paper or on the screen. What do you do next? Well, you've got to get it to the right journalist. And this is where a lot of good news releases fail. They go to the wrong journalist or go to the journalist that left 6 weeks ago. Now, you're not expected to know the lives of all journalists you need to write to in your working life because you're busy. But a simple phone call to the magazine or the paper is what you should do to find out that Joe Bloggs writes this paper or this column. Or you'll read Ad News and you'll see it's somebody writing in these columns. And if there's no byline, which is what we call these things, ring up and ask. That extra phone call, that extra bit of trouble will guarantee you when you send your news release in, someone will get it. Because you might think it's important, but they don't, and no one's going to bother picking it up and saying, oh, this is from Fred. Oh, geez, we better try and get at the right bloke. No, where is he today? They don't do that. Go to the trouble of finding exactly the journalist, where he or she sits, what they're doing, and send it to them. And if, over time, if you've got ambitions to do this, you need to keep a list of media contacts and keep them up to date. They change regularly, unfortunately. They complain to me as I work in corporate public relations, how you guys keep changing. And we get to know you and then you go away, they say, the journalists to me. And I said, well, that happens to you as well. You get to know journalists very well, and they're there for 6 months on a particular round or a particular newspaper, and they go off. And it starts all over again. But that's the way it is. You should update this list and add names when you see the name of a new journalist. You should plan your news releases ahead, over a year. Now, you'll know when you've got particular events happening, like this thing today. Awards, release of product. You'll know they're coming up. Think about it in advance. Spend some time thinking, now, in October we've got this coming out. Let's put some ideas down. That's good news release planning. 99% of news releases aren't written like that, of course. You know the product's coming out on Friday. You want to do a news release on Monday, or Thursday night, perhaps. Well, you can do it if you like, but the quality of a news release, getting it delivered to the right person is going to be affected. So if you're serious about getting into news releases, plan ahead. When you've done your news release, contact a journalist and tell him or her you are sending them a news release. I say, thanks. But don't ring them up 14 times after that and say, where is it? Why haven't you written it? It just irritates them. Ten ideas for news releases. They're listed in the paper. Company anniversaries, 10, 15, 20 years. Opening a new office or showroom. New management or staff appointments. Sales figures, sponsorship donations, new products, community services, mergers or company takeover, winning a major industry award, involvement in conventions, seminars and trade shows. Now, you may think that some of those are a bit ho-hum. Well, they wouldn't, would they? Well, you don't know unless you try. Not even usually should a right will be published. I think the strike rate's about 1 in 10. That shouldn't stop you from trying. And even if they don't publish the particular story you've written, your masterpiece, they'll know you're there. And they'll see the second and the third and the fourth one. And then they'll start to say, oh yes, that's what they're doing. So writing these news releases, as I've said before, a disciplined process. A certain structure has to be followed. You've got to be prepared, avoid editorial and fact, and you're in no way. Now, with the help of Bill over here, I've gone through 4 Pyramid Award winners for 2004, 2005. Bill, thank you. And what I've done, and I've done the sheet for you in front of you, I've gone through 4 products that won awards. The case number 1, Sands Promotion Star Life Foundation Bucket Tennis Hat. And you'll see in the sheet in front of you how I would have approached it. First of all, I write the company name down. Suppose as a public relations consultant working for, or even an in-house PR person, or just yourself, doesn't matter. You write down the company, the client and the product. Now you think that's boring, but remember that you've got to keep this stuff in your news release eventually. Because a journalist will get this, doesn't know the intricacies that you know. You've been with the product for 6 months, 12 months, and you've just gotten gone for it. But when you start writing news releases, you've got to step back from that and pretend it's the first time you've ever seen this information. So in the sheet in front of you, you'll see what I've done. I've put the company, the client and the product. I've picked a headline. Hat turns into a tennis ball. That's kind of cute. And then the key points. And this is the way I would write the news release. The first point will be the first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph. So as I go down, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines there for each point. Each of those lines will represent a paragraph or a piece of information. And I've picked those out as I think are the most interesting, eye-catching information of the journalist. Now, you may vary, you have a different opinion, of course. You may put the third point first and the third point last. That's okay. But make sure the key point's there in your news release. And then down the bottom, always put in a bit about yourself. Brief details of the company, head office, previous awards, any specific skills that you think are yours. And what you need to do is write that and use that in every news release you write. Same thing, same paragraph, updated of course, so that when the journalist reads this particular news release from me, he may not necessarily run your story, but he'll get a sense of who you are because you've always, in the bottom of the news release, included some fundamental recurring information. And then at the bottom, or the top, you put your contact details. Number 2, high impact marketing. Client was National Heart Foundation in New Zealand, the product electronic skipping rope. The headline I picked was electronic skipping rope, a fundraising success. Then the key points I drew out of the information was electronic skipping rope, a fundraising success. Rope is a great initiative, thank you for kids. Rope counts distance, calories and skips. In fact, I suspect a journalist might make that the first point. Rope exercise can be fun and fight off obesity. Now, that's certainly got a headline in the current debate about fatness. Increased funds raised, participation increased. Well, there's some good numbers. So it's likely this particular news release, they'd ring up and say, well, what was the fund increase and what was the participation rate increase? Comments from the company spokesperson and then details again of the company. The fundamental, we call them boilerplates in fact. The same paragraph appears at the bottom of the news release. Number 3. Walk-in promotions, a Howarth communication for Motorola, a world record banner. Headline, this is how I would have written it, World record banner launches Motorola 3G in Australia. Now, why they use those words, world record banner, Motorola 3G in Australia? Now, pretty obvious, isn't it? World record 3G, that's going to catch the eye of the journalist. Oh, that's interesting. What's Motorola doing? Key points, world record banner launches Motorola 3G in Australia. I led with that because I opened up, the headline was that. Details of the banner, and that's where you get specific, size, colour, how it was made, all that sort of thing. Thousands of Motorola customers flash mobbed, first time I've ever heard that expression, to free concept, explain flash mobbing. Important to explain some technical terms. Sometimes you may not be able to avoid them. You can't always reduce everything to plain English. That's okay, but if you have to use a technical term or expression, then explain it in plain English. Again, a comment from the company spokesperson and then the brief details of the company. We do it all in one page. And the little news release writing test I'm going to give you in about 5 minutes' time is about that particular case study. Number 4, and the final one, Prema connection. Suncorp was the client, the product was a sun watch. So the headline I wrote was, watch warns of UV levels in the sunshine. There's a bit of drama there. The watch warns, I use warn as a particularly emotive word, UV levels in sunshine. So when you write these headlines, you've got to be a bit colourful, a bit emotional, because it's the first time the journalist will read, warning levels, sunshine, what's that all about? And then I would lead with a special watch tells the wearer of the 4 ultraviolet levels in sunshine. Next dot point would be light, plastic, 4 colours, very popular. Important info about ultraviolet rays and protection from overexposure. Good stuff. That's the warning story being filled out. And then comment from the company spokesperson about how clever they were to have done all this. And then finally, again, the same repeat paragraph, details of the company. Okay? So if I had to write these newsletters for you, that's how I would do it. I'd give that to you and say, this is what I'm going to write. You'd say, good, go away and write it. If I work for you, in that case. And if you don't have a luxury of that, which you probably may not have, is do it for yourself. And writing newsletters is about standing outside your company and looking in, because that's what the journalist will do. Now, I'll finish my presentation to there. Any questions? Because it is Sunday morning and there was a commitment from me to give you a little newsletter writing test. Okay? Would you like to do the writing test? There's an answer available.
They have no choice.
They have no choice. Okay.
They want to do the writing.
On your little, on your single sheet with what the 4 case studies analysed, the number 3 one is the test. Number 3, on the back. Now, remember I explained what an introduction was, or intro, 25 words first paragraph, where you've got to capture everything in you possibly can about this particular story. I'd like to give you 5-7 minutes, and I'll count so you don't get too exhausted. See if you can put together some words that you think would pass for the introduction of a newsletter written about the Walk-in Promotions Motorola 3G banner. Go.
Excuse me, for a second.
Yes.
While you're all starting to write that, the reason that I requested you all to actually do write this is that it is so important that we understand that the media is a tool for us to promote our companies. And it is free advertising for both suppliers. If you get the knack of this, and you can cut through the other news releases that aren't necessarily meeting these criteria, so that you can find yourself in the media, even if the release doesn't get run, you'll be starting to build that relationship with the journalists who will start to think of you to call for comment when there is a story about a promotional product or a story about child obesity or whatever the case may be. And I can tell you from personal experience of doing it with APPA, you start to build a relationship and they start to call you and ask you questions. What's going on in the promotional industry? Tell me what's news. Because they have to fill space. And it's about filling space that the journalists are constantly looking for. So the more succinct your news release is and the better it's written, the better chance you're going to just have exactly what you've written put in the paper because they're looking to fill that space. So give it a shot.
Could we just have the slide back of the image of this product, please?
Sure. Ian, can we go back number 3, please?
Bill, excuse me.
Sure.
What's flash mobbing? I have no idea.
Oh, what flash mobbing is? Oh, I'm sure you weren't. Haven't you ever been involved in a flash mob, Helen? It's when you text message a location, and everyone shows up, and that's it, basically. So flash mobbing is how many people you can get to one location with a text message, which is why Motorola actually did that. And the goal was to have the world record of people show up for this flash mobbing in a record period of time. And of course, the banner was there to obviously promote the brand. And Walk-In Promotions took them, obviously, quite some time to print something that large. It wasn't done on a single machine, interestingly enough. And so that's what a flash mob is.
So do we know how many people attended?
Yes, you do, but you don't need this for the first and third paragraph.
Because all we're doing is just the first
About
paragraph.
3,000 turned up, I think, is the figure I got from the information. No, that's Sydney, that. Centennial Park, or was it? Tambalong. Yeah, okay, Tambalong. Yep, just down the back here.
Tambalong Park. God knows how you spell it.
Biggest banner Tambalong Park.
This was, and the information I used was published in the awards booklet that Bill gave me. So I had no more information than you have. There certainly is more information, but you won't need it for this introduction. And you'll see in the answer sheet why you won't need it. You've got enough information from your handout sheet here, the number 3, to start. I feel sorry giving you this homework on a Sunday morning at 8:30. Yeah. Not fair, Bill. I'm going to ask for three volunteers to stand up and read their first 25 words. And when we've done that, I'll read you the first paragraph of the answer sheet here, perhaps even the second or third, to give you the full story. And then Bill has the answer sheet there you can read and take away and think about. So do we have any volunteers who'd like to read? Yes, sir. First one, there's 2 more to go. So just before you start, who'd like to be the second and third volunteer? Number 2 in the back. Can we have a girl, a woman? Yes, 3, okay. We've got the 3 volunteers. We're ready to go. Sir.
For tomorrow's games eventuate. Thousands of Motorola customers are expected to attend, and extra security and paramedics have been called on to attend the event if a disaster occurs. A spokesman from Motorola commented that 3G is in the hands of the gods. Walk-In Promotions, Australia's leading sign company, refused to comment, only to say that this is a record attempt and that extra holes have been punched into the sign.
Well done. Now that's the Truth and Sunday version, yes? Well done, well done. Number 2 at the back, yes.
Another first for 3G. Adding another entry to Australia's list of biggest, best or first, thousands of Motorola phone users were invited to celebrate the launch of 3G by hoisting the world's largest banner yesterday at insert stadium here.
Excellent.
25 words exactly.
Excellent. Well done. Round of applause. They're very good at this. You didn't have to come to this today. Yes, you. There's a microphone for you.
Okay. I'm Wendy Rudge from Tangibility. I use the same headline as what was on the sample. It just says thousands, mobile phone users turned out in their thousands today at Centennial Park to help Motorola launch their new G3 in Australia.
Excellent, excellent. Very good. Well, all those three would work, by the way. Slightly long one for there, but that's okay. Bit of colour, bit of movement. Whether the journalist would pick up any particular angles, up to them, of course, but you've made some very good starts. What I wrote here was this. My heading was, Walk-in Promotions helps create world flash mobbing record. Walk-in Promotions, a Sydney-based promotional products company, has helped create a world flash mobbing record when it produced a unique banner, 20 metres square, that was used to launch Motorola 3G in Australia. That was my opening line. Now, Bill's going to hand out the answer sheet. Then I go on and explain what flash mobbing is. I then bring a quote from Peter Jones, a fictitious character, of course, from Walk-in Promotions. You see, I've got flash mobbing explained, put away. Then I introduce the company, who's this Walk-in Promotion mob. Then a quote from Peter Jones himself, how he did it. We made the banner, first of its kind in Australia, blah, 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 blah. Then what else they did? They produced T-shirts for more than 3,000 turned up. Then Peter Jones came back again, explained a couple of times how the banner was produced, and then the final paragraph was details of the company. And Peter Jones would add that in. And that's one page. And that's typical of the news release you could write. Yes?
Must have been a pretty good news release for fact to become fiction or fiction to become fact, because if you count the people there, there's definitely less than 1,100, probably 900 max. You believe 3,000.
Well, that was information I was given. I said, yeah. You'd have to quiz Peter Jones about that, or Motorola. You'd ask Motorola about the facts, those facts. In fact, the journalist might do that. How did you know there was 3,000? Or maybe they had 3,000 on their list. That's genuine. That's a legitimate inquiry to make, of course. Of course, there's no, in a sense, whilst there's a very strict way of writing news releases, and the format's absolutely crucial, the introduction, attribution, editorialising, the space, the layout, what's in it is entirely up to you. How the journalist interprets it and uses it is entirely up to him or her. So you can see even in little test case this morning how there's three quite different angles, approaches taken to the same story. That's okay. What you want to do is get your event published, your name in the magazine or the newspaper, and some success about your organisation. Now, you may quibble when you see it eventually. Oh, I didn't quite say that, or didn't that? He's taken that a bit out of context. That will happen. But just be grateful for the exposure and your name being used in the story. Not at the expense of telling fibs, of course. And you'll always, if you go into this and go all the way, you'll find that what you wrote and what you wanted to say and what the journalist eventually wrote aren't identical necessarily. As long as the basic facts are there, in the first paragraph particularly, you'll be right.
Thank you, John.
Good, Bill.